The late afternoon sun blazed over the Atlanta suburbs, turning the asphalt into shimmering waves of heat that rose from the pavement like transparent curtains. Lieutenant Sarah Collins pulled the unmarked sedan into the driveway of a modest two-story house on Berkshire Lane, her hands steady on the wheel despite the tension coiled in her shoulders. The street was exactly what they needed. The kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and nothing ever happened worth talking about. Trimmed lawns stretched in identical rectangles. Minivans sat in driveways, and somewhere down the block, a sprinkler system created rainbow patterns in the harsh sunlight. Perfect camouflage for a man whose life hung by a thread. In the back seat, Marcus Webb sat rigid, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Sarah could see the fear in his eyes through the rearview mirror, that particular brand of terror that came from knowing too much about the wrong people. Webb was 43 years old, but looked 60, his face gaunt and grey, his dress shirt wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat that had soaked through the fabric in dark patches under his arms and across his back. He'd been an accountant, a numbers man, someone who'd spent his entire adult life in air-conditioned offices pushing paper and balancing ledgers. Nothing in his background suggested heroism or courage, yet here he was, about to testify against people who killed for far less than what he knew. Max sat beside Webb in the back seat, his Belgian Malinois frame alert but calm, those intelligent amber eyes tracking every movement on the street with the focused attention of a predator. The dog's tan and black coat gleamed in the sunlight, his pointed ears swiveling to catch sounds Sarah couldn't hear. She'd worked with Max for 4 years, long enough to read his body language like a second language, to understand the subtle differences between casual alertness and genuine concern. Right now, he was focused but relaxed, exactly what she needed. Webb had been jumpy during the entire 40-minute drive from the federal building downtown, flinching at every car that came too close, every shadow that moved too quickly, every sudden sound. Max's presence had been the only thing keeping the man from a complete breakdown. 2 patrol units had arrived 15 minutes earlier, officers already positioned at the front and rear of the property. Sarah could see Officer Martinez at the front corner of the house, his uniform dark against the white siding, his hand resting casually on his belt but close enough to his weapon to matter. Around back, Officers Chen and Rodriguez would be covering the rear entrance and the small backyard that faced onto a greenbelt. Standard security protocol for a witness protection detail. This was supposed to be simple textbook, the kind of operation they'd run dozens of times before. Webb would spend 48 hours here while federal marshals finalized the paperwork for witness protection. He'd hand over his evidence, sign the necessary documents, disappear into a new life with a new name and a new history, and the task force would dismantle the organization that had turned money laundering into an art form. Clean, efficient, by the book. Sarah stepped out of the vehicle, the heat hitting her like a physical force. Her Navy Atlanta PD uniform absorbed the sun, and she could already feel sweat forming along her spine, trickling down between her shoulder blades. The air was thick with humidity, that oppressive weight that made every breath feel like work. She opened the rear door, and Max jumped out immediately, his paws hitting the pavement with practiced ease. The dog did a quick perimeter sweep of the immediate area, nose working overtime, ears forward and mobile, tail carried in a neutral position that spoke of professional focus. Everything about his posture said the approach was clear. No immediate threats, no anomalies in the scent picture that warranted concern. Webb climbed out slowly, his legs unsteady, his face pale despite the heat. He was a small man, barely 5'7", with thinning brown hair that he'd attempted to comb over a spreading bald spot. His soft build spoke of decades behind a desk, of too many takeout lunches and not enough exercise. Nothing about him suggested he was about to bring down one of the most dangerous criminal networks in the Southeast. But Sarah had seen the preliminary documents, had spent hours reviewing the spreadsheets and wire transfers that Webb had managed to copy before running. The man was sitting on a goldmine of evidence, detailed financial records that tracked millions of dollars through dozens of shell corporations and offshore accounts. It was the kind of documentation that could send powerful people to prison for the rest of their lives. The kind of information that got people killed. Detective James Morrison met them at the front door before Sarah could even reach for the handle. He was a 20-year veteran with silver hair and the kind of steady demeanor that came from seeing it all, from working every kind of case the city could throw at an investigator. Deep lines bracketed his mouth and eyes, speaking to long nights and tough decisions. He'd been part of the advance team, arriving 2 hours earlier to secure the house and run background checks on every neighbor within a 3-block radius. Nothing had flagged. The elderly couple next door were retired teachers. The family across the street had lived there for 12 years. The single mother 2 houses down worked as a nurse at Emory. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that a federal witness was about to spend 2 days in their midst. "Clean sweep," Morrison said quietly as Sarah approached, his voice pitched low enough that Webb wouldn't hear. "We've been through every room, every closet, every cabinet. Security system is active. All entry points are monitored. Cameras on the front and back doors, motion sensors on the windows. The neighbors think we're renovating for a new tenant, maybe doing some kind of inspection. Nobody's asking questions." Sarah nodded, her hand resting briefly on Max's head. The dog leaned into her touch for a moment, his way of acknowledging her presence, before returning his attention to Webb, who stood trembling beside the car like a man facing execution. "How long until the marshals arrive?" "Tomorrow afternoon, around 1400 hours. They want to do the handoff in daylight, less chance of complications, fewer shadows to hide in, easier to spot anyone who doesn't belong." Morrison glanced at Webb with something approaching pity. "Poor bastard, looks like he's going to pass out. When did he last sleep?" "He says he slept on the couch in the federal building last night, but I doubt that's true. He's been running on adrenaline and fear for 3 days." Sarah studied Webb's pale face, the tremor in his hands. "Let's get him inside before he collapses out here." The interior of the house was exactly what she'd expected. Furnished, but impersonal. The kind of place that existed purely for function rather than comfort. A living room with a generic brown couch and a television that probably hadn't been turned on in months. A kitchen with the basics: refrigerator, stove, microwave, a small table with 2 chairs. Upstairs would be bedrooms with beds and nothing else. No personal touches, no character, no soul. No photos on the walls, no books on the shelves, no magazines on the coffee table. It was a temporary container for temporary people, a way station between one life and another. Webb stood in the living room, his arms wrapped around himself, despite the heat that still lingered in the house. An officer had turned on the air conditioning, but it would take time for the cool air to displace the accumulated warmth of the day. The thermostat read 82 degrees, and Sarah could feel the sweat continuing to bead on her forehead. She gestured to the couch, trying to project calm confidence. "Sit. We need to go over security protocols. Make sure you understand what's expected." Max had other ideas. The dog ignored Webb entirely and moved through the first floor with purpose, his nose working constantly, painting an invisible map of scents and markers. This was standard behavior, something Sarah had seen hundreds of times in dozens of locations. Max was mapping the space, cataloging scents, establishing a baseline understanding of what belonged here and what didn't. When they'd been here for a few hours, he'd know instantly if anything changed, if anyone entered who shouldn't be here, if something was introduced that violated the established scent picture. It was what made him Invaluable, this ability to read an environment at a level humans couldn't begin to match. Morrison pulled out a folder and sat across from Webb on a chair that creaked under his weight. The detective's expression was all business now, the empathy replaced by professional focus. The marshals will brief you more thoroughly tomorrow, but here's what you need to know right now. You don't go near any windows, not even to look outside. You don't make any phone calls, not to anyone, for any reason. You don't contact anyone, not family, not friends, not old co-workers, not the guy who delivers your dry cleaning. As far as the world is concerned, you vanished the moment you got into that car this morning. You're a ghost. Do you understand? Webb nodded mechanically, but Sarah could see he wasn't really processing the words. She'd seen this before too. The shutdown that happened when fear became too much, when the reality of what someone had chosen became overwhelming. The man was running on fumes, operating on autopilot, his conscious mind too flooded with anxiety to fully engage with the present moment. "When did you last eat?" she asked, deliberately changing the subject to something concrete and manageable. He blinked at her, confused by the question, as if eating was a concept from another lifetime. "I don't remember. Yesterday? Maybe the day before? They gave me something at the Federal Building, I think. A sandwich? I can't remember if I ate it." "There's food in the kitchen," Sarah said, keeping her voice gentle. "Morrison, help him get something together. Doesn't matter what. Just something with protein and calories. He needs fuel." She looked at Webb directly, making sure he was actually hearing her. "You need to eat. You need to stay functional. The marshals will be here tomorrow afternoon, and then this part is over. You just need to hold on for one more day." Morrison stood and guided Webb toward the kitchen with a hand on his shoulder, the detective's voice dropping to a lower register as he continued talking, probably giving Webb something to focus on besides his fear. Sarah used the moment to do a final walkthrough with Max, following her partner as he completed his initial survey of the house. She found the dog on the stairs, his head tilted slightly as he tested the air, his nose working in small, rapid movements that Sarah had learned to recognize as information processing. The second floor was laid out simply: 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, all doors open to facilitate airflow and allow for quick visual checks. Max moved through each room methodically, and Sarah followed, her eyes tracking what he tracked, looking for anything that might concern him. The master bedroom had been designated for Webb, with its attached bathroom and window that faced the backyard. The smallest bedroom, barely large enough for a twin bed and a dresser, would be hers. Morrison and the 2 patrol officers would rotate shifts downstairs, maintaining constant vigilance on the entry points. By tomorrow evening, this would all be over. Webb would be in federal custody, the evidence would be in the right hands, and Sarah and Max would be back to their regular duties. Max finished his inspection of the main bathroom, checking behind the shower curtain and sniffing around the base of the toilet and sink, then moved back into the hallway. That's when Sarah noticed the subtle change in his posture. His ears had swiveled forward, locked onto something with laser focus. His tail, usually relaxed and mobile when they weren't actively working, had gone still, held in a rigid line that spoke of intense concentration. His entire body had shifted, weight balanced, attention absolute. She froze, her hand moving instinctively toward her weapon. "What is it?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The dog moved to the wall between the master bedroom and the second bedroom, the one they designated as empty storage, not needed for their purposes. His nose pressed against the drywall, working up and down a specific section about 4 feet wide and running from knee height to just above Sarah's head. His breathing changed, becoming more focused, more intense. The rapid sniffing sounds clearly audible in the quiet hallway. Sarah's pulse quickened. This wasn't casual investigation. This was something specific. Max was telling her something important. She knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Show me, Max. Show me what you've got." Max sat immediately, his eyes locked on that section of wall, his posture rigid and formal. It was a clear alert, the signal they'd trained for years, the indication that he'd found something worth investigating. There was something behind that wall, something that didn't belong, something that violated his understanding of how this space should read. Sarah pulled her radio, keeping her eyes on the wall, already trying to puzzle out what Max had detected. "Morrison, I need you upstairs, now. And bring Martinez." The detective appeared within seconds, taking the stairs 2 at a time, his hand resting instinctively on his weapon when he saw Sarah's expression and Max's rigid, alert posture. Martinez was right behind him, younger and less experienced but with good instincts. Both men understood immediately that this wasn't routine. "What's wrong?" Morrison asked. "Max has alerted on this wall." Sarah ran her hand along the drywall, feeling for anything unusual, any variation in texture or temperature. The surface was smooth, uninterrupted, painted the same bland beige as the rest of the house. There were no obvious seams, no discoloration, no indication that anything was different about this section compared to any other wall in the house. "Did your team check behind the walls during the security sweep?" Morrison frowned, thinking back through the protocols they'd followed. "We ran thermal imaging on the exterior, checked for hidden compartments in the usual places, basements, attics, floorboards, spaces behind built-in furniture. Standard protocol for a Safehouse inspection. But no, we didn't specifically check the interior walls. We're not looking for smuggling compartments, just making sure the structure is secure and no one's hiding in the house. This is supposed to be a clean location, vetted and approved." He looked at Max, then back at Sarah. "Are you sure he's not picking up something from the other side? Maybe a dead rat in the wall cavity, something like that." "Max doesn't alert on dead rats. He doesn't make mistakes." Sarah stood, studying the wall from different angles, looking for anything that might explain what her partner had detected. The section Max had indicated was positioned between 2 doorways, a natural dead space in the layout. If someone wanted to hide something structural, conceal a modification without it being immediately obvious, it would be the perfect spot. The wall appeared to be standard construction, drywall over studs, nothing unusual about it at all. But Max said something was there, and Max was never wrong. "Get me a stud finder and call the property manager. I want to know the complete history of this house, every renovation, every modification, every time someone so much as hung a picture frame." Morrison hesitated, and Sarah could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. If they started tearing into walls based on a dog's alert, and there was nothing there, it would be a black mark on the operation. It would raise questions about procedures and judgment calls. But if they ignored the alert and something was wrong, the consequences could be catastrophic. "Collins, you understand what you're asking? If we breach this wall and find nothing, we're going to have to answer for it. Property damage, deviation from protocol, waste of resources." "There's something there," Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying absolute certainty that came from 4 years of partnership, from hundreds of alerts that had never once been false. "Max has found explosives in shipping containers that 3 different teams missed. He's located missing children in crawl spaces that we'd already searched twice. He sniffed out drugs in compartments that had fooled electronic scanners and X-ray equipment. If he says something is in that wall, something is in that wall. I'm not moving forward with this detail until we know what it is." The detective pulled out his phone, his jaw tight, but his decision made. He trusted Sarah's judgment, trusted her track record, even if this felt wrong. He made the calls, first to the property management office, then to Captain Williams to report the situation and request additional resources. Within 10 minutes, things started moving fast. An officer arrived with a stud finder and a basic toolkit pulled from one of the patrol units. Sarah ran the device along the wall section, mapping the framework behind the drywall with small, careful movements. The readout showed the standard pattern at first, studs spaced 16 inches on center, exactly what building code required for interior walls. But when she reached the section Max had indicated, the reading changed dramatically. There was a gap, a void where support beams should have been, a space approximately 3 feet wide and running floor to ceiling. "There's empty space here," she said, marking the boundaries with a pencil. "Approximately 3 feet wide, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall. This isn't standard construction. Someone modified this wall deliberately, removed structural elements, and created a cavity." Morrison crouched beside her, studying the readings on the stud finder, his skepticism fading and being replaced by professional concern that deepened the lines around his mouth. "That's not normal. That's not something that happens by accident. You'd need to cut through studs, reframe the opening, probably reinforce the surrounding structure to compensate. That's deliberate construction, planned and executed by someone who knew what they were doing." He looked up at Sarah, and she could see the implications dawning in his eyes. "This is a department safehouse. It's been vetted, inspected, certified for use in witness protection. If someone modified the structure without authorization, we have a serious problem." Sarah stood back, her mind racing through angles and possibilities, calculating what this meant and what it didn't. The wall was internal, not load-bearing based on the layout, which meant modifying it wouldn't have required major structural changes or permits that would leave a paper trail. Whoever built this compartment had known what they were doing, had understood how to make the modification invisible to casual inspection. "We need to open it, carefully. Whatever's in there, we need to know what it is before we proceed with the web detail." Morrison made another call, this time requesting a forensic team and additional backup. The situation had escalated from routine protection detail to active investigation in a matter of minutes. Within 20 minutes, the quiet house on Berkshire Lane had transformed into something resembling a crime scene. Officers cordoned off the upstairs, and a forensic specialist named Diana Chen arrived with proper equipment for safely breaching the wall without destroying potential evidence. Webb had been moved to the downstairs bedroom under guard, kept away from whatever they were about to discover. Sarah could hear him asking questions, his voice high with panic, but Morrison was handling him, keeping him calm and contained. Her focus remained on the wall and on Max, who hadn't moved from his alert position. The dog's dedication was absolute, his concentration unbroken, despite the activity around him. Whatever he'd detected was still there, still warranting his attention. Chen studied the wall with professional interest, running her own equipment over the surface, confirming Sarah's findings. She was in her early 30s, with short black hair and the kind of focused intensity that came from years of careful, methodical work. "If there's a compartment here, there has to be an access panel. No one would seal something permanently unless they never intended to retrieve it, and if that was the case, why create the space at all? No, this was built for access, which means there's a way to open it." She ran her gloved hands along the edges where wall met floor, where wall met ceiling, searching for seams or gaps that would indicate a movable panel. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, feeling for variations that eyes might miss. "There, look at this." Sarah moved closer. Chen had found it, a hairline crack running vertically along the edge of the section, so fine it was almost invisible even when you knew where to look. But once you saw it, you could trace its path from floor to ceiling, then across the top and down the other side. A perfect rectangle, hidden in plain sight through careful workmanship and matching paint. "It's a panel," Chen said, her voice carrying quiet satisfaction at the discovery. "Secured from behind, probably with magnetic catches or a simple mechanical latch system. We'll need to create an access point to release the mechanism without damaging whatever might be inside. Give me a few minutes." "Do it," Sarah ordered, her voice steady despite the ice spreading through her veins. This was wrong. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. A hidden compartment in a department safehouse meant someone had violated the integrity of a protected location. It meant corruption or compromise or infiltration at a level that made her stomach turn. Chen selected a small rotary tool from her kit and cut a careful square into the drywall, just large enough to reach through without compromising the structural integrity of the panel itself. The high-pitched whine of the tool filled the hallway, and dust filled the air in a fine cloud. Max sneezed once, his nose twitching at the irritation, but he held his position, unwilling to abandon his alert until Sarah released him. When Chen pulled away the cut section, they could see into the cavity. Dark, empty space, and about 2 feet back from the drywall surface, the edge of something solid. Metal, gleaming dully in the light from the hallway. The forensic specialist reached in carefully, her movements cautious and deliberate, aware that booby traps were a possibility in situations like this. There was a soft click that sounded impossibly loud in the tense silence, and suddenly the entire panel shifted, swinging outward on hidden hinges that had been precisely balanced to make the movement smooth and silent. The void beyond was revealed, a cavity built into the wall structure with professional precision, and inside it sat a fireproof document box, the kind designed to survive floods and fires and disasters. It was approximately 18 inches by 12 inches by 6 inches deep, made of heavy-gauge steel, with a combination lock securing the lid. No one moved. No one spoke. The implications crashed through Sarah's mind like a freight train gathering speed downhill. This was a department safehouse, vetted and secured, used exclusively for witness protection and sensitive operations. The existence of a hidden compartment meant someone had modified the structure, someone with access and knowledge and the technical ability to make major changes without leaving obvious traces. Someone who shouldn't have been here, or someone who should have been here but was working against everything the department stood for. "Photograph everything before we touch anything," Sarah said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears, as if someone else was speaking through her. "Full documentation. Chain of custody starts now. This isn't just evidence. This is potential corruption inside the department. We need everything locked down tight." Chen documented the scene from every angle, the camera flash creating stark shadows in the narrow space, illuminating the compartment and its contents with harsh white light. She photographed the panel mechanism, the cavity construction, the placement of the document box. Then, with Sarah and Morrison watching in heavy silence, she carefully removed the box from its hiding place. It was heavy, the weight of metal and whatever contents it held, making Chen grunt slightly with the effort. She set it on the floor of the hallway, and they all stared at it, as if it might explode. "We need bolt cutters for the lock," Morrison said, his voice rough. He looked shaken, his usual steady demeanor cracking at the edges. "No!" Sarah's mind was racing ahead, seeing angles and implications, thinking through consequences. If someone went to this much trouble to hide this, to build a secret compartment in a department safehouse and secure it with a combination lock, they'll have ways to know if it's been compromised, alarms maybe, or just checking the compartment regularly. If we open it here, we might tip our hand before we know what we're dealing with. We need to be smart about this. She pulled out her phone and called Captain Williams, laying out the situation in concise, professional terms. Her voice stayed level, but inside she was reeling. Williams listened without interrupting, and the silence on the other end of the line told her everything she needed to know. The captain understood immediately what they'd stumbled into, understood the potential scope of what a hidden compartment in a safe house might mean. "Don't open it there," Williams said finally, his voice tight with controlled tension. "Secure the scene, document everything, bring the box to headquarters. And Collins, Trust nobody until we know what's in there. Nobody, except your immediate team. No radio chatter about this. Cell phones only, direct contact, understand? Understood, sir. Sarah ended the call and looked at Morrison and Chen. We're taking this downtown. Captain's orders. The Safehouse is compromised, which means the web detail is compromised. We need to move him to a different location immediately. Morrison's face had gone pale, the implications settling on him like a physical weight. Someone inside, he said quietly, barely above a whisper. Someone in the department built that compartment or knew about it. This isn't external. This is one of ours. Or multiple someones, Sarah replied. The thought made her sick. Either way, we have a massive problem. Webb was put here because this was supposed to be secure. If the location itself is compromised, if someone had access to plant whatever is in that box, then the entire operation might be blown before it even started. Max finally broke his alert, moving close to Sarah and leaning his full weight against her leg. She could feel the tension in his body, the awareness that the humans around him were stressed and afraid. Dogs picked up on that, absorbed emotional states from their handlers like sponges. Right now, the air in this house was thick with dread and suspicion, and Max was responding to that shift in atmosphere. They secured the document box in an evidence bag, Chen maintaining chain of custody with meticulous precision, signing and dating and time-stamping every step of the process. Sarah assigned officers Chen and Rodriguez to remain with Webb, while she, Morrison, Martinez and Max transported the box to headquarters. They'd arrange a different Safehouse location, one that hadn't been compromised before the night was over. The drive back into the city felt surreal. The evening traffic flowing normally, while Sarah sat in the passenger seat with evidence that could blow open their entire operation. The document box sat in an evidence bag on her lap, surprisingly heavy, its presence almost radioactive in its implications. Morrison drove in silence, his jaw clenched, his hands tight on the wheel. Martinez sat in back with Max, both of them quiet, processing what they'd discovered. Police headquarters was busy with the evening shift change, officers coming and going in the controlled chaos that marked the transition between day and night crews. Sarah bypassed the normal evidence intake procedures and went straight to Captain Williams' office on the 3rd floor. The captain was waiting, along with Lieutenant Marcus Reed from Internal Affairs and Detective Sarah Park from the Financial Crimes Unit. The presence of IA sent a clear message that Sarah received like a punch to the gut. They were treating this as a corruption investigation from minute one, assuming the worst until proven otherwise. "Show me," Williams said without preamble, his face carved from stone. Chen set up a portable workstation in the captain's office, spreading protective sheets across Williams' desk before placing the document box in the center. She photographed it from every angle, documented the combination lock with close-up shots that captured serial numbers and manufacturer details. Then she carefully applied bolt cutters to the mechanism, the metal groaning in protest before the lock snapped with a sharp crack that made everyone in the room flinch. The lid lifted with a faint creak of hinges, and the contents were revealed. Files, dozens of them, organized with meticulous care. Sarah pulled on gloves, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, and began removing documents, laying them out on Williams' desk in careful rows. Financial records, bank statements, wire transfer receipts. But these weren't Webb's files, weren't the evidence they'd been expecting from the informant they were protecting. These were records of police operations, confidential case files, witness lists with names and current locations, undercover officer identities, complete with cover names and assignments, surveillance schedules with times and locations, years' worth of sensitive information, the kind that got people killed if it fell into the wrong hands. Every document was marked with department classification stamps, originals or high-quality copies of materials that should have been locked in secure storage, not hidden in a wall in a suburban safe house. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered, his voice hollow with shock. Lieutenant Reed leaned over the documents, his face set in grim lines. Reed was a career IA investigator, someone who'd spent 20 years hunting corruption inside the department, and Sarah could see the anger burning behind his professional mask. "This is everything. Every witness protection case we've run in the last 3 years. Every confidential informant with active cases, every undercover placement in organized crime, drugs, vice. This is the complete blueprint of our most sensitive operations right here on this desk." He looked up at Williams. "Whoever put this here had access to our most protected systems. This isn't street-level corruption. This is someone high enough to pull files from multiple divisions without raising flags." Sarah continued sorting through the files, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind tried to process the scope of what they'd found. Cases she recognized, operations she'd worked or heard about, witnesses she'd transported or protected. All of it documented, organized, ready to be handed over to anyone willing to pay for the information. Then she found it, a manila envelope separate from the rest, thicker than the others. Inside was a ledger, handwritten in neat block letters, documenting payments. Dates, amounts, case numbers, and at the bottom of each entry a set of initials. "DB," she read aloud, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. 43 separate payments over an 18-month period, ranging from $20,000 to $150,000 per transaction. Total compensation, $2.6 million. She looked up, meeting Williams's eyes. "Someone has been selling information for over 2 years, and they've made a fortune doing it." Detective Park pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced speed. She was financial crimes, an expert at following money trails and uncovering hidden transactions. DB, cross-referencing with department personnel database, filtering for anyone with access to Safehouse locations and sensitive case files. Her screen filled with search results, narrowing as she added parameters. Got it! One match for someone with the initials DB who had access to all these systems. She paused, her expression darkening as she read the results. Detective David Brennan, 15 years on the force, currently assigned to the Organized Crime Task Force. He's been involved in every major witness protection case for the past 5 years, either directly or in a supervisory capacity. He has clearance for confidential informant identities, undercover operations, surveillance planning, full access to everything in this box. The name hit Sarah like a punch to the solar plexus. She knew Brennan, had worked cases with him over the years. He was good, thorough, with a solid reputation and a clean record. Everyone liked him, trusted him, relied on his experience and judgment. The idea that he'd been selling information, that he'd been the reason witnesses disappeared or cases fell apart, made her stomach turn with acidic revulsion. How many people had died because of him? How many operations had been blown? How many officers had been put at risk? "Where is he now?" Williams demanded, his voice like steel. Park checked the duty roster, pulling up real-time information about Brennan's status. Signed out at 16:30, off duty until 0800 tomorrow morning. His logged location shows he went home to his apartment in Buckhead. "Find him," Williams ordered, his tone brooking no argument. But quietly, no radio chatter, no department-wide alerts. If Brennan knows we're onto him, he'll run or worse. He'll warn whoever he's been selling to, and we'll lose any chance of rolling up the entire network. Collins, Morrison, you stay here. Reed, coordinate with your team to get eyes on Brennan without tipping him. Park, start tracking the money. I want to know where every dollar came from and where it went. Work backwards from the ledger, find the payments, identify the buyers. He looked at each of them in turn. This doesn't leave this room until we have Brennan in custody, and even then, we keep the circle tight. If he's dirty, we don't know who else might be. The next 3 hours were a controlled storm of activity. Park matched the ledger entries to specific cases, creating a timeline of Brennan's betrayal that stretched back nearly 2 years. Every payment corresponded with a leak, a witness who disappeared before they could testify, an operation that went sideways when suspects seemed to know exactly when and where police would move. The organization Webb had fled from hadn't been lucky or clever. They'd had help from inside the police department, had been paying for information that kept them one step ahead of every investigation. Reed coordinated with IA to set up surveillance on Brennan's apartment, positioning unmarked units where they could watch the exits without being obvious. They pulled traffic camera footage, verified that Brennan had actually gone home, confirmed his vehicle was in the assigned parking space. Everything suggested he had no idea his world was about to come crashing down. Meanwhile, forensic accountants began tracking the money, following the trail through shell corporations and offshore accounts. The scope of the corruption was staggering. Brennan hadn't just sold a few pieces of information for quick cash. He'd been running a systematic operation, harvesting sensitive data and selling it to multiple buyers, creating a network of compromised cases that had undermined years of investigative work. Sarah remained at headquarters, Max at her side, watching the investigation unfold through the windows of William's office. Webb had been moved to a different location, a hotel room registered under a false name with marshals providing direct security. The original Safehouse had been sealed as a crime scene. Forensic teams going through every inch of the structure, looking for additional compromises or hidden surveillance equipment. Morrison joined her at the window, both of them staring out at the Atlanta skyline as night fell over the city. The detective looked exhausted, aged by what they'd uncovered, and Sarah understood the feeling. This was their department, their family, and one of their own had betrayed everything they stood for. How many people died because of him? Morrison asked quietly, voicing the question that had been haunting Sarah since they'd opened that box. We'll probably never know the full count, Sarah replied, the words tasting bitter. Some witnesses disappeared completely, no bodies recovered. Some undercover officers had their covers blown and barely got out alive. Every case he touched is now suspect. Everything will have to be reviewed, every conviction potentially challenged. The legal fallout alone will take years to sort out, but we'll make sure he answers for every single one we can prove. Max lay at her feet, finally relaxed after hours of tension. She could see his eyes starting to close, the adrenaline wearing off as the immediate crisis passed. He'd done his job, had done it perfectly, and now he was ready to rest. But there would be no rest for a while, not for any of them. This was just beginning. At 9:30 p.m., Williams made the call. Sarah and Morrison were in the room when it happened, watching the captain's face as he gave the order. Bring him in, clean and quiet. No drama, no press, no leaks. Brennan comes in for questioning about an ongoing investigation, routine interview. Once he's in the building, we'll see if he wants to cooperate or lawyer up. The arrest happened 40 minutes later. Brennan was taken into custody without incident, pulled from his apartment by plainclothes IA investigators who told him they needed his expertise on an active case. He came willingly, suspecting nothing, and was driven to headquarters in an unmarked vehicle. Only when they brought him into an interview room and Reed laid out the evidence did his face collapse, the color draining from his features as he realized they knew everything. The interrogation lasted until 3 in the morning, Reed and Park working in tandem, applying steady pressure while Williams and Sarah watched through the one-way glass. Brennan held out for almost an hour, denying everything, claiming he was being framed. But when they showed him the ledger with his initials, when they laid out the financial records Park had already traced to accounts in his name, when they walked him through the timeline of leaks that corresponded with his access to specific files, his resistance crumbled. He broke completely, tears streaming down his face as he gave up names and methods and every detail of how he'd sold out his badge. The organization Webb was informing against had approached him 3 years ago, offering money for small pieces of information. It had started innocently enough, or so he claimed, just confirming details they already suspected. But the amounts had grown larger, the requests more dangerous, and by the time Brennan understood what he'd become, he was in too deep to walk away. They owned him, had threatened his family, had shown him photographs of his children at school to make clear what would happen if he stopped cooperating. Sarah listened to the confession with a mix of disgust and pity. Part of her understood how it happened, how someone could make one bad decision and then find themselves trapped in an impossible situation. But another part, the part that had worked with victims and witnesses and officers who'd trusted the system to protect them, felt nothing but contempt. Brennan had made choices, had continued to make choices, and people had died because of those choices. Morrison stood beside her, his arms crossed, his face hard. He's trying to play the victim card, says they threatened his family, like that excuses 2 years of betrayal. His family was never in danger, Sarah said flatly. These organizations don't operate that way. They want him useful, productive, not scared into making mistakes. He sold out for money, pure and simple. The threats came later, if they came at all. And even if they were real, he had options. He could have come forward, asked for protection, worked with IA to build a case. Instead, he kept taking their money and let people die. By 4 a.m., Brennan had given them everything. Names of his contacts in the criminal organization, dead drops where he delivered information, account numbers for offshore banks where the payments had been deposited. The web of corruption extended beyond what anyone had imagined, touching multiple agencies and crossing state lines. The FBI would need to be brought in. Federal prosecutors would need to coordinate with local authorities. This had grown from a department problem to a national case. Williams found Sarah in the observation room as Reed was wrapping up the formal statement. "Go home, Collins. You and that dog have done enough for one day, more than enough. Get some rest, because tomorrow we're going to need you sharp. The task force will spend months untangling this mess, and your testimony is going to be crucial to the prosecution." "The files," Sarah started, gesturing toward the boxes of evidence that had been catalogued and secured, "are being handed over to the appropriate authorities. FBI is sending a team first thing in the morning. They'll coordinate with our prosecutors, build cases against everyone Brennan gave up. But because of Max, because you trusted his alert and insisted on opening that wall, we got ahead of it. Brennan was planning to retrieve those files tonight, during the chaos of the web protection detail. If he'd succeeded, we'd have never known about the leak, never caught him. Webb would have been compromised the moment he entered federal protection, and Brennan would have continued selling information until someone else got killed." Sarah nodded slowly, the weight of it settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. "Max knew. He knew something was wrong with that wall. I almost dismissed it, almost chalked it up to an anomaly. But he was so insistent, so focused. He wouldn't let it go. Animals have instincts we've lost," William said, his voice softening slightly. "Or maybe never had in the first place. That dog saved lives today, potentially dozens of them. Make sure he gets proper recognition, full commendation, the works. And Collins, good work. Not everyone would have pushed back on protocol, would have insisted on following a dog's alert over standard procedures. You trusted your partner. That made all the difference." The drive home felt surreal. The city sliding past in the pre-dawn darkness, streets empty except for delivery trucks and the occasional patrol car. Max sat in the passenger seat, his head resting on the center console, finally allowing himself to fully relax now that they were away from the tension and urgency of headquarters. Sarah kept one hand on his head as she drove, feeling the soft fur, the steady warmth of him, the simple comfort of his presence. They'd been partners for 4 years, had worked hundreds of cases together in that time. She'd seen him track suspects through miles of wilderness, locate evidence in impossible conditions, protect her in situations that turned violent without warning, comfort victims with his gentle presence. But this was different. This was Max refusing to move, refusing to accept that everything was fine, refusing to let them walk away from something critical. He'd been right, and his stubbornness had cracked open a case that reached far beyond one corrupt cop. Her apartment was quiet, unchanged, exactly as she'd left it 20 hours ago when this had been just another protection detail, another routine assignment in a career full of them. She fed Max, gave him fresh water, watched him lap it up with the simple contentment of a dog who'd earned his rest. Then they both collapsed on the couch, Sarah still in her uniform, too exhausted to care about changing or showering or any of the normal routines of coming home. Max sprawled beside her, his head in her lap, and she sat there stroking his ears, thinking about walls and secrets and trust. The department would recover from this. They'd plug the leak, salvage what cases they could, rebuild the damaged trust with their informants and witnesses and the public. But it would take time, years perhaps, and some relationships might never fully heal. Some witnesses who'd been compromised were dead, their families destroyed. Some officers who trusted Brennan would struggle with that betrayal, questioning their own judgment and wondering what signs they'd missed. Her phone buzzed, the vibration loud in the quiet apartment. A text from Park. Brennan's records led to 3 more arrests, more coming tomorrow. Webb's testimony is solid. You and Max broke it wide open. Federal prosecutors calling it the biggest corruption case in department history. Sarah read the message twice, then set the phone aside. Max's breathing had deepened, slipping into genuine sleep, his body finally releasing the tension of the day. She envied him that ability, the capacity to let go once the danger passed, to simply exist in the present moment without dwelling on what had happened or worrying about what might come next. How many times had someone walked past that wall, never knowing what was hidden inside? How many people had slept in that safe house, their lives supposedly protected by the department, while evidence of betrayal sat just feet away? The thought made her sick with anger and sorrow. The system that was supposed to protect people had been compromised from within, turned into a weapon that endangered the very individuals it claimed to serve. But Max had known. Somehow, through whatever combination of scent and instinct and training, he'd known that Wall wasn't right, and he'd refused to leave, refused to accept their assurances that everything was fine, refused to move forward until they found what he was trying to show them. "Good boy," she whispered, her hand still moving through his fur in long, soothing strokes. "Such a good boy, Max, the very best." The dog's tail thumped once against the couch cushion, a sleepy acknowledgement that he heard her even in his dreams, and then he was still again. Sarah let her head fall back against the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. They'd prevented a disaster, caught a traitor, saved lives that would have been lost if Brennan had continued operating unchecked. But it had come so close to going the other way. If Max hadn't alerted, if she hadn't trusted him, if they'd followed protocol and left on schedule, if Morrison had pulled rank and refused to let her breach the wall, she forced the thoughts away. They hadn't. Max had alerted. She had trusted him, and they'd found the truth. That was what mattered. That was what she needed to hold on to when the what-ifs tried to drown her. The sun was starting to rise when she finally fell asleep, still on the couch, still in her uniform, her hand resting on Max's head. The dog woke once during the transition from night to day, lifting his head to check on her, verifying that his human was safe and sleeping peacefully. Satisfied, he settled back down with a contented sigh. His human was safe. The danger had passed. The bad people had been caught. Everything else was just noise.